They say you can never go back to high school, but I guess my wife didn't get the memo. Turns out, she left more than her yearbook behind when she graduated. And me? I got a front row seat to the world's most awkward love triangle reunion. For context, my name is Jack, and I've been married to Emma for 12 years. Emma and I met in college, fell in love during one of those golden summers where everything feels perfect, and built a life together in the years that followed. Emma had always been the life of the party. Charismatic, smart, and the kind of person who lit up a room. I was the quieter one, happy to let her shine while I worked behind the scenes to make sure our life stayed on track. Our marriage wasn't perfect. Whose is, but it was solid. Or so I thought. The story begins when Emma's high school reunion invitation arrived in the mail. She seemed giddy about it, excited to catch up with old friends and revisit the glory days. I didn't think much of it at first. We've all got those nostalgic streaks, right? Besides, Emma had never shown any signs of being hung up on the past. She never even talked about her high school days much, aside from the usual anecdotes, prom drama, favorite teachers, the time she nearly got suspended for sneaking into the principal's office to leave a prank note. But looking back, there were signs. Subtle ones, like the way her face lit up when she read the invitation, or how she immediately started texting her old high school friends about the event. At the time, I thought it was endearing. I told myself she deserved a little fun after all these years. The weeks leading up to the reunion were a blur of preparation. Emma went all out, shopping for a new dress, scheduling hair and nail appointments, even trying out a new skincare routine. She joked about wanting to look her best to show them what they missed out on. But I started to notice she was spending more time on her appearance than usual. Still, I didn't think much of it. I chalked it up to vanity, or maybe a harmless desire to make a good impression. The day of the reunion arrived, and Emma was practically glowing. She spent hours getting ready, and when she finally came downstairs, she looked stunning. I complimented her, of course, but something about her demeanor felt different. It wasn't just excitement. It was nervous energy, like she was about to audition for a role she wasn't sure she'd land. She kissed me goodbye, promising to text if it got too late, and headed out the door with a bounce in her step. As I watched her drive away, I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. Not suspicion, exactly, but a strange unease. I spent the evening alone, catching up on a few projects and watching a movie. Emma sent a few texts throughout the night, mostly vague updates about how fun it was to see everyone and how the venue had barely changed since high school. She even sent a group photo of her and some old friends, all of them grinning like teenagers again. It wasn't until the next day that the cracks began to show. Emma came home late that night, claiming she'd had a little too much to drink and stayed over at a friend's place. Again, nothing inherently suspicious. She was responsible enough to know when not to drive, and I didn't want to seem like the controlling husband who interrogates her every move. But she was off. Her usual bubbly demeanor was subdued, almost guarded, and she seemed to avoid my gaze more than usual. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle changes in her behavior. She was more attached to her phone, smiling at texts she didn't share and locking the screen whenever I walked into the room. She started staying late at work more often, citing urgent deadlines. But her excuses felt rehearsed. And then there were the nostalgic remarks. Out of nowhere, Emma began reminiscing about her high school days in ways she never had before. She'd mention old friends, favorite memories, and even her first boyfriend, Noah. Noah. The name alone made my stomach tighten, though I couldn't explain why. Emma had mentioned him a few times in passing over the years, always brushing it off as a teenage fling. But now, it felt like his name was slipping into conversations more frequently, like a melody she couldn't stop humming. I tried to dismiss it. Maybe the reunion had stirred up some old memories. Nothing more. But the unease in my gut wouldn't go away. The tipping point came when I found a note tucked into her purse while searching for car keys. It was handwritten, folded neatly, and unmistakably intimate. The words "last night" felt just like old times. Let's not wait another 20 years to do this again. Were scrawled across the page in a handwriting I didn't recognize. My heart sank. That was the moment I knew my marriage wasn't as solid as I thought. Emma hadn't just attended a reunion. She'd revisited a part of her life I wasn't invited to. But instead of confronting her then and there, I decided to dig deeper. I needed to know the full story before I acted. Because if she thought she could rewrite our history with her high school sweetheart, she had no idea who she was dealing with. They say when you're searching for answers, you should be prepared for what you'll find. I wasn't. After finding the note in Emma's purse, I felt like I was standing on a cliff, staring into a dark void. Part of me wanted to throw the note away, pretend I hadn't seen it, and convince myself everything was fine. But I couldn't unsee those words. Instead, I decided to get to the truth. Emma's behavior only fueled my suspicions. She'd always been open about her life, sharing work stories, showing me texts from her friends, and leaving her phone around the house without a second thought. But now, everything was different. Her phone became an extension of her, glued to her hand, and when she wasn't using it, it was locked and face down. She was constantly smiling at messages she didn't share, brushing off my casual questions with vague excuses. I started paying closer attention. Subtle things began to stand out, like how she seemed unusually cheerful after certain texts or how she took longer to run errands than she used to. I told myself I was overthinking, but the doubt was growing, festering in the back of my mind. I began piecing together her recent behavior, looking for patterns. I noticed how often she mentioned Noah, always in a casual, offhand way, like she was testing the waters. She'd say things like, "It's funny how some people haven't changed at all since high school," or, "Did I ever tell you about the time, Noah, and I almost got detention for sneaking into the theater?" At first, I thought it was harmless nostalgia, but now it felt calculated, like she was weaving him into our conversations to normalize his presence in her thoughts. Then, one night while she was asleep, I crossed a line I never thought I would. I checked her phone. It wasn't easy. She'd changed her passcode, something she'd never done before, which only confirmed my suspicions. But I'd seen her type it in enough times to guess it after a few tries. When the screen unlocked, my stomach churned with a mix of dread and adrenaline. Her messages were neatly organized as always, but it didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There, under a contact simply labeled Noah, was a thread of text that told me everything I needed to know. The messages weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. There was a familiarity in their tone, a warmth that felt out of place for two people who were supposedly just old friends catching up. They referenced their shared history, inside jokes I didn't understand, and plans to meet for coffee to keep catching up. One message stood out above the rest. "Seeing you again brought back so many memories. It's like nothing's changed." I couldn't breathe. The thread was filled with breadcrumbs that pointed to something deeper. Mentions of late-night drives, stolen moments during the reunion, and a shared understanding that didn't include me. It wasn't just the text that hurt. It was the realization that Emma had been living a life I wasn't part of, a life where I was the outsider. But I still didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I dug deeper. I went through her social media, scanning for any signs of their connection. It wasn't obvious at first. Emma was careful about what she posted, but Noah's profile was less guarded. His recent posts were a goldmine. Photos from the reunion, tagged with Emma and a small group of old friends. One photo in particular caught my attention. It was taken at the reunion, a candid shot of Emma and Noah standing close, their faces inches apart as they laughed at some private joke. Her hand rested lightly on his chest, a gesture so intimate it made my blood boil. The caption read, "Some connections never fade." I wasn't just dealing with a high school crush rekindled by nostalgia. This was deliberate, calculated, and worse, ongoing. I needed more proof. The next weekend, Emma told me she was meeting some high school friends for lunch. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't telling me the whole story. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. She left the house dressed casually, her hair tied back and her makeup minimal. But there was a tension in her step, like she was anticipating something. I kept my distance as she drove across town, pulling into the parking lot of a small cafe. I parked a block away and watched as she went inside. A few minutes later, Noah arrived. They sat at a table near the window, laughing and talking like old friends or something more. At one point, he reached across the table and touched her hand, a gesture that seemed far too intimate for a simple reunion catch-up. I took photos, not because I wanted to humiliate her, but because I needed undeniable proof. I needed something to hold on to when she inevitably tried to twist the story. When Emma came home later that day, she was cheerful, her mood light and carefree. She kissed me on the cheek and told me lunch was great, that it was nice catching up with the girls. I nodded, playing along, but inside I was seething. The next few days were a blur of planning. I compiled everything I'd found, the texts, the photos, the social media posts, into a single folder. I didn't just want to confront Emma. I wanted her to see the full scope of what she'd done. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a choice. She'd chosen to rewrite our history for the sake of reliving her past, and she thought I wouldn't notice. But she was about to find out just how wrong she was. The night I decided to confront Emma felt like standing on the edge of a battlefield, fully armed and ready. I wasn't going to yell or scream. That wasn't my style. But I was going to lay everything bare, every text, photo, and lie she thought she had hidden. If she wanted to rewrite history with Noah, she was going to see the wreckage left in her wake. I spent the day preparing, organizing every shred of evidence I'd gathered into a single, damning file. The texts, the photos, the screenshots of her social media conversations. It was all there, sorted chronologically. It felt like a grotesque scrapbook of her betrayal. I didn't want to confront her without this. I needed her to see that this wasn't just suspicion or paranoia. This was her truth, stripped of excuses. That evening, Emma came home late again, claiming she'd been at a team meeting that ran long. She breezed through the door with a smile, kissed me on the cheek, and asked how my day was. It was so normal, so routine, that for a moment I almost doubted myself. But then I saw her phone in her hand, the same phone she'd used to text Noah about their coffee catch-ups, and the anger came flooding back. I waited until after dinner. I didn't want her to brush this off as a heat-of-the-moment argument or accuse me of being emotional. I needed her to see the cold, calculated reality of what she'd done. After the dishes were cleared, I told her we needed to talk. I brought out the folder and placed it on the coffee table between us. Emma gave me a puzzled look, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes. Hesitation, maybe even fear. I watched her as she opened the folder and started flipping through the pages. At first, her expression was blank, as though she couldn't process what she was seeing. But as the pages revealed more, texts with Noah, photos of their reunion, the picture of them at the cafe, her face drained of color. She froze on the photo of them at the cafe, her fingers trembling. I could see the panic in her eyes as the reality of her situation sank in. She didn't need to ask how I'd found all this. She knew I'd been watching, piecing it all together while she played house with me and romance with Noah. When she finally looked up at me, her face was pale, her lips slightly parted as though she were searching for words. But there was nothing she could say that would erase the evidence in front of her. For the next hour, I let her talk. She stumbled through excuses, claiming the texts were just jokes. The cafe meeting was innocent, and that the photo was taken out of context. She said the usual things. She never meant to hurt me, it didn't mean anything, it was just nostalgia. But the words felt hollow, as though she didn't believe them herself. Her voice grew shaky as she tried to shift the blame. She accused me of invading her privacy, of overreacting, of not understanding how the reunion had stirred up old feelings she hadn't dealt with. But every excuse she threw at me fell flat. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to show her what she'd done. By the end of the conversation, Emma was crying, her face buried in her hands as she begged me to forgive her. She swore she'd end things with Noah, that she'd focus on rebuilding our marriage, that this didn't have to be the end. But I didn't feel sympathy. I felt cold, detached, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. The truth was, I'd already made up my mind. The confrontation wasn't about reconciliation, it was about closure. I told Emma I'd be filing for divorce, that I'd already contacted a lawyer, and that the evidence she'd just seen would be part of the case. I told her she could keep her nostalgia, her memories, and her ex-boyfriend, but she wasn't going to keep me. Her reaction was a mix of shock and desperation. She begged me to reconsider, to think about the years we'd spent together, the life we'd built. But every word she said only reminded me of what she'd thrown away. That night, I packed a bag and left. I stayed with a friend for a few days while I sorted out the logistics of moving out permanently. Emma called and texted constantly, alternating between apologies and anger, but I didn't respond. I couldn't. The following week, I sent her the divorce papers. I made sure everything was in order. Our financial records, the evidence of her affair, even statements from mutual friends who had seen her with Noah at the reunion. I wasn't just ending our marriage. I was making sure she understood the full weight of her actions. The fallout was swift and brutal. Word of Emma's affair spread quickly, thanks in part to the mutual friends I'd shared the story with. Her reputation took a hit, and so did her social life. Meanwhile, Noah, who had apparently been dating someone else at the time, disappeared from her life as quickly as he'd re-entered it. For me, the divorce was bittersweet. I didn't feel victorious or vindicated, just free. Free from the lies, the doubt, and the betrayal that had consumed me for weeks. Emma, on the other hand, was left with nothing but the fragments of her past. They say karma works in mysterious ways. For Emma, karma looked a lot like an organized binder of her own betrayal, and me making sure it hit where it hurt the most. Divorce wasn't just an end to our marriage. It was the start of a chain reaction that left Emma standing in the rubble of the life she'd so carelessly destroyed. It began with the divorce proceedings. My lawyer, a no-nonsense professional who specialized in cases like mine, made it clear that we had the upper hand. The texts, the photos, and the financial records documenting her rendezvous with Noah were more than enough to paint a damning picture of her infidelity. I filed on grounds of adultery, a move that not only solidified my case, but also gave me leverage to ensure a favorable settlement. Emma fought hard at first, claiming the evidence was circumstantial and that Noah was just a friend. But her efforts crumbled quickly under the weight of the evidence. When my lawyer presented the timeline of her behavior, including the financial misconduct of using our shared accounts for her secret meetings, it was game over. The judge awarded me the house, a larger portion of our assets, and minimal spousal support for her. She walked away with just enough to survive, but nowhere near what she'd expected. But financial ruin was only the beginning. I made sure the truth of Emma's betrayal didn't stay confined to the courtroom. The same evidence I'd used in the divorce became the centerpiece of a quiet campaign to ensure that her reputation bore the weight of her actions. I didn't spread rumors or embellish the story. I simply shared the facts with the people who mattered most. I started with her family. Emma's parents had always been kind to me, treating me like a son and respecting our marriage. I sent them an email explaining the situation, attaching the evidence of her affair. I didn't add commentary or vitriol, just the cold, hard truth. The fallout was immediate. Her parents were furious and deeply disappointed, cutting off financial support they'd occasionally provided and distancing themselves from her entirely. Then came our mutual friends. I chose one or two people I trusted, sharing the story in confidence. Of course, confidence is a loose term when it comes to gossip, and within days, the story spread. Our social circle quickly turned against Emma, with friends who had once adored her now treating her with suspicion and disdain. The judgment didn't come from me. It came from the realization that she wasn't the person they thought she was. Her professional life wasn't spared either. Emma worked in a field that valued reputation and networking, and her affair with Noah was a ticking time bomb. I anonymously forwarded some of the evidence to her workplace, specifically her boss, noting that her behavior could reflect poorly on their company's image. Within weeks, she was called into a meeting and told her contract wouldn't be renewed. She left her job with no prospects and a tarnished name in her industry. As for Noah, his life didn't remain untouched. He'd been dating someone else while pursuing Emma, a detail I discovered through a bit of online sleuthing. I made sure his girlfriend received the same evidence I'd shared with everyone else. From what I heard, their relationship ended in spectacular fashion, with her leaving him publicly humiliated. Emma tried to pick up the pieces, but every attempt seemed to backfire. Friends wouldn't return her calls, job interviews dried up, and her parents refused to lend her money. She moved out of the city to a smaller town, hoping for a fresh start, but even there whispers of her reputation followed. For me, watching her downfall was a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. I didn't feel guilty for what I'd done. Emma's choices had consequences, and I'd merely ensured those consequences caught up with her. But there was no joy in it either. Revenge may feel satisfying in the moment, but it doesn't undo the betrayal that led you there. Still, there was something liberating about knowing I'd reclaimed control. Emma thought she could rewrite our history with Noah and walk away unscathed, but she underestimated me. By the time I was done, she was left with nothing but her regrets. The months following the divorce were a blur of rebuilding and reflection. I sold the house, not because I needed to, but because I couldn't stand living in a place so filled with memories of what was supposed to be. I moved to a new city, started a new job, and began piecing my life back together. At first, I felt untethered, like I was floating through the days without a clear purpose. But slowly, things started to fall into place. I reconnected with old friends, took up hobbies I'd forgotten about, and found joy in the small things. An afternoon hike, a quiet cup of coffee, the freedom to live on my own terms. Emma tried to reach out a few times, sending emails and texts that ranged from apologetic to angry. She blamed me for ruining her life, accusing me of being vindictive and cruel. I never responded. Her life wasn't my responsibility anymore, and I refused to let her pull me back into the chaos she created. Noah, predictably, vanished from her life not long after the dust settled. He wasn't interested in a real relationship, just the thrill of revisiting his high school glory days. From what I heard through mutual friends, Emma was left alone, struggling to rebuild her life in the shadow of her own mistakes. For a long time, I avoided dating, unsure if I could ever trust someone again. But eventually, I met someone, a woman who was everything Emma wasn't. She was kind, honest, and grounded in a way that felt refreshing. For the first time in years, I felt like I could be myself without worrying about hidden agendas or buried secrets. Looking back, the betrayal hurt more than I can put into words. But it also taught me something valuable, that love without trust isn't love at all. Emma's reunion with Noah may have brought back memories for her, but for me, it brought clarity. It showed me that I deserved better than being someone's second choice, a placeholder for their unfinished business. Now, I live with no regrets. Emma made her choices, and I made mine. And as I sit here, typing this out in my quiet, peaceful apartment, I can finally say, I'm free.